Today, Donald Trump, along with its Republican threads, are considered to be identified with conservatism, anti immigration, imposing of high tariffs, gun culture. On the other hand, Kamala Harris, along with its supporters and the party of Democratic Blues, they are identified as supporters of immigrants, People's Party, and more liberal as compared to the Republicans, gun control, pro women, and social equality and welfare measures. But what if I told you that 2 centuries ago, their ideologies were flipped? They not only contrasted, but they were quite the opposite of each other. What I'm trying to say that 2 centuries ago, the Republicans were identified by being more liberals, the Democrats were more prone to supporting conservatism. That is our agenda for today. First of all, just for information, although in the last lecture we had discussed about the donkeys and elephants and the marking of Tuesdays as the day of elections and the present form and the voting patterns of the government, we had not talked about the flag of America. Very interesting. The stars of the flag, they are 50 in total, which represent the 50 states of the United States of America. These red and white stripes are in total 13, alternating between red. So red, white, and it will end with red. 13, which represent the erstwhile 13 colonies of America, which joined together to form the first form or first appearance of the modern United States. So the agenda for today will be we are going to primarily study about the evolution of political ideologies in the US. Now, important factors which we will use to arrive at the explanation of these policies. First of all, geography. As a geography student, I believe without geography, you are nowhere. And you will see as we go into discussion by the help of maps. I'll also draw some maps along with you. We'll color. So, geography had a great influence in defining the pattern of ideology. Then, immigration, then the slavery. Okay. I'll be using terms such as blacks and whites, not to offend anybody, but to make things clearer. And then expansion of territories, and then influential key figures, influential presidents. Okay, so it is going to be very interesting. Just bear with me. So, and at the end of the lecture, after we discuss all that, we'll finally conclude with the color scheme, the red and blue, why reds now are defined to be ones who support Republicans and blue, those associated with Democratic Party. So stay tuned. First of all, we start with the geography. So as in the previous 5 minutes, I have told that geography one of the defining factors. Now see this geography basically the Appalachian Mountains, one important mountain range. So initially, when we consider the colonization, of course, credit goes to the European powers during that time. So the colonization started from 1585 onwards. So multiple European powers like they came to the Asian nations, India. So there were also colonies. So they consisted of British, French, Spanish, basically these three colonial powers. So obviously, when they came, the explorers such as Christopher Columbus, Amerigo Vespucci, so they arrived at this Atlantic coast. This is the Atlantic Ocean. So they settled in these coastal areas and formed their colonies. Primarily, British formed these colonies. This Mexican area. was occupied by the Spanish. These plains area was occupied by the French. Some were independent republics, some areas were not explored. So, as you can see, one of the important rivers here, the river Mississippi, the river Missouri. This present day state is the state of Mississippi, recognized with this river, very important. These are the Great Plains, these are the Rocky Mountains. So, initially, what happened was during the period of colonization from 1585 to the 1750s, and after that, problems started happening in the colonies. So, what happened was they started arriving and settling here, and consequently in search of new lands, exploration, in search of gold, in search of labor and many other things, they started going beyond these Appalachian mountains, beyond these river valleys. First they expanded till the Mississippi. They drove out in the native people, the native Indians, the red Indians. Then they pushed them all the way to first to Oklahoma, then to South Dakota, North Dakota. You might have heard about this place if you have watched some movie Tukes. Okay, so a lot of them were massacred, so they were displaced, and finally Oregon, Washington. So one thing you have to note, that first they were colonies. Colonies were established by the British. Then some states were formed simultaneously. Some new territories were formed, which later underwent the formation of the proper states. Okay, so this is, and one point I would like to emphasize, that we have discussed the factors which affected the evolution and influenced the political ideology. One important factor is that US, unlike India, is a federation of states. India is a union of states. India does not allow its states or its federal territories to secede. On the other hand, Federation of states means that initially we have discussed that these were colonies. So these colonies, after the American War of Independence, they came together as a measure of convenience and common administration, common cause. They formed together the US. And today also, the powers, states have considerable power. Unlike in the quasi federal system of India, I have discussed this in detail in the previous lecture. So, one important more thing, this, if you see the latitudinal extent, latitudes and longitudes, so it also influenced the slavery. We discussed slavery. So slavery was influenced because what happened was during colonization period and beyond, from the 1800s, during the late 18th century, the slaves, the people, the downtrodden, backward, so-called backward people, the slaves were brought from Africa. Africa will lie on the southeastern part across the Atlantic Ocean. They were brought by sea, and they were brought to work in the plantations in America, Caribbean. Okay. So here what happened was, why it was feasible, because you see that these are the high latitudes. The Tropic of Cancer passes just below the state of Florida. Okay, so 23.5 degree north. So, just by definition, common sense, we will know that the places near to the tropics or near the equator, they will be warmer, they will be humid. So, they supported the plantation of crops such as cotton and tobacco. And we know that for these are labor intensive crops. During that time technology also was not there, and in the previous lecture we have also discussed that this industrialization took place way afterwards, way later. So for working on these large plantation, large farms, slave labor was used. On the other hand, if I mark, so initially this region primarily, the southern states were primarily identified as the slave states where slavery was considered legal. I'll come to this again. On the other hand, northern states, colder climate, So they did not support the growth of crops as much. On the other hand, there were a lot of mineral resources in this region. Still today, like the Great Lakes region, these are the Great Lakes, Superior, Michigan, Huron, Erie, and Ontario. Great Lakes, they have iron deposits. The Appalachian Mountains have coal deposits and lots of rivers. There is a St. Lawrence River, waterways, lots of rivers which were used for transport also. So industrialization favored this region. So they were not dependent upon slaves as such. Machines did most of the work. So this made the contrast between the northern and the southern states, and this brought about the civil war of the 1860s, which is again very influential, very significant in influencing the democratic and republican ideologies. Fine. So I think this is clear. Okay. So we were discussing about the colonies, the erstwhile colonies, 13 colonies. So initially they this is the present map of America. We have also discussed in the previous lecture. This was what the America looked like in the 1850s and the 60s. So basically, these states were not established as then. This is the present. This territory now is Canada, but this territory, the colonies roughly represented this area, this red area constituted of the 13 erstwhile territories whose name were retained once the proper borders which we see today on the US were formed. Okay. So if I start to name these territories just for convenience. So this is the Atlantic Ocean. So here we have Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia. This is Maryland. Then this is Delaware. This is New Jersey. This is Pennsylvania. This is New York. Then this is Connecticut. This is Rhode Island. This is Massachusetts. This is New Hampshire. And so this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. And the current territories, this Maine was under Massachusetts, territory of Massachusetts. And this Maine was under the territory Massachusetts. And the present day of Vermont, the state of Vermont was claimed by both New York and New Hampshire. So 13 colonies, they were like this. Okay, fine. So ultimately, what happened later, how the westward expansion, I have told you initially via the map. So they started exploring more areas. Fine. So this territory, this territory was ceded from the British because the American War of Independence, which was fought from 1775 all the way to 17, so from 1775 all the way into the 1801 towards 1801. So it was against the tyranny of the British. So you get what the problem is, that the American War of Independence, these 13 colonies, these were colonized by the British, but they did not have much say in the mainland British Parliament. Moreover, the mainland Britishers, they started imposing various taxes like stamp duty, high tariffs, high taxes, the freedom and liberty to voice their opinions from the colonists, which were British themselves, that was not there. So ultimately, these reasons ultimately they culminated in a Boston Tea Party. It was a very famous term. I will not go much into detail. And finally, the American War of Independence was fought 1776. The Congress Here, the Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence, and then the war was fought. The Britishers, the mainland Britishers were defeated, and the American nation came into picture. Okay, so this territory was gained from the British from in 1783 in the midst of the Civil War. Then these things are important because they have significance when we discuss the various evolutions in the ideologies. Okay, this is the territory of Louisiana. Louisiana is currently this state, but it was initially a whole territory. Okay, so by 1803, this were the states, these were the territories. So the expansion had gone till here. Then in 1803, this the territory of Louisiana was obtained. This was purchased from the French in 1803. Fine. This small portion, this small portion was ceded from the British again in 1818. The state, this Florida and some southern part. Here we have Louisiana. This is Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia. This is present day Florida. So this Florida was gained from the Spanish. This was gained from the Spanish in 1816. Fine. Then further westward, if we move, this was, I'll simply mark the colors first. This was Oregon, territory of Oregon. Again, it was earlier under US British joint control. Then it was mainly occupied, primarily occupied by the Americans. And then we have this was annexed, or it was won in the Mexican War. It includes the present day, you can see this territories, California, then we have Nevada, then we have Utah, then we have Arizona. So all this territories incorporated. And finally, a major part of the territory is this. This was earlier the Republic of Texas. So this Texas, again, it also underwent. Currently, Texas is this state, but it underwent changes initially, and the dates are important. I'll just mention it. So here, again, this is the area again taken from Mexico. This area of Mexico was again under primarily the colonists were the Spanish, and here this area and this area. So this defines the present day US. So this Louisiana territory we have explained from the French 1803. Then Oregon, this Oregon territory, this was obtained from the British in 1846. Okay. Then this Texas was won in the US war. It was annexed in 1845. Then this was annexed from the Mexicans in 1848. Okay, and this territory, the Treaty of Gadsden was there in 1853, where this territory was again purchased from Mexico and became part of the US. And one state we are missing, can you tell me what? This Alaska. So Alaska actually was purchased in 1868 by the United States from Russia. Okay, so I think this is clear. Now we get to the main points, some influential figures. So during this is George Washington, who became the first president of the United States in 1789. Okay, after the American War of Independence. Okay, so George Washington, some major contribution was that centralization of the power, a strong union. Because again, like I said, that US is a federation of states. So he wanted to consolidate the states so that tendencies of secession were reduced. Then he established the National Bank of US to repay all the debts, tariffs, and protectionism. Okay. So he was not affiliated to any particular party. In fact, there was this during and right after his presidency, there was this person, Alexander Hamilton. So he was responsible for the formation of the Federalist Party. Okay. So similar ideals. So this was, I'm just going to highlight the main differences so the evolution of the political ideologies becomes clear. Okay. This is the third president of the United States, Thomas Jefferson. So he was one of the pioneers of the Democratic Republican Party. Today we have Democrats different, Republican different. So this was a different party, Democratic Republican. So how it differed from the ideologies? So this 1801, so it from the 1790s to the early 1800s, this political party was influential. So Thomas Jefferson, according to the ideals, so he was in favor, unlike George Washington, he was in favor of laissez-faire, which is free market economy, like the abolition of tariffs on trade. Then decentralization, again difference from the concentration of power or strong union government of George Washington and the Federalist Party. Finally, promotion of agrarianism, the agricultural sector. And finally, after some time during the early 1800s, also some differences were made which led to the further evolution and formation of new parties. Next, we will come to it. So, during the 1820s, now what happened was as the territories were getting organized and reorganized, I have already discussed the factors behind the propagation and manifestation of slavery. So this red states, just ignore this. This red states, just if we go this territory, we can see this was purchased in 2000, sorry, in 1803, the Louisiana territory. Okay. So initially till 1803, these states came into picture, these states and territories. Okay. So they were westward, expanding westwards. Fine. So, when new states were being formed, it was debated that new states should they allow slavery or they should abolish it, because slavery became a big part of the advancement of the US economy. And moreover, since again I am emphasizing, since US is a federation of states, these red states, primarily the southern states, they identify with the slave states. So where slavery was legal and majority of the economy ran through slave labor, and they also have representation in the US Congress. So if new states are being incorporated but they are free of slavery, where slavery is illegal, then these states will lose power in the Senate and in the House of Representatives. On the other hand, if new states are incorporated as states which allow slavery, where slavery is legal, then these states will gain power. Now this will become problem for the northern states, are you realizing? Because the states have equivalent power, they are not like other countries like Britain or in fact India, our nation. Fine. So 1820, one important fact, the Missouri Compromise in 1820. So two additional states were to be incorporated. One is the state of Missouri and one is the state of Maine. If you recognize, Maine was earlier a territory under Massachusetts. So, to properly form that state and compromise to maintain a balance and to satisfy the slave states as well as the non slave states. So, this Missouri was made a slave state where slavery was legalized, and this Maine was a free state where slavery was illegal. And then a compromise, which is important, is reached here Missouri Compromise, that they decided, all the legislature, that boss, this is not the right way to go about expanding. So let us do one thing. This green line or this lower boundary of Missouri, let it be the defining feature of whether new states should allow slavery or not. So it was decided that the states above this from now on, they will not, they will be free, and the states below this, they may decide to be, to allow slavery. So this was one important. Okay. Now these two gentlemen, very influential. So this person is Andrew Jackson, and this person is James Polk. Two influential presidents. Okay, now the creation of the Democratic Party. So we have already discussed the Democratic Republican Party of Thomas Jefferson. Now these Andrew Jackson believed in the fundamental of white supremacy. He even promoted the Ku Klux, Ku Klux Klan group of white supremacists. He he advocated westward expansion, and not just any westward expansion, tyrannical westward expansion. In fact, in the 1830s, he was one of the main proponents of driving the native tribes like Cherokee tribes. They used to, in southeastern US, they used to reside. He drove them to this Oklahoma, present day Oklahoma territory. Fine. So, white supremacy and concentration of power in the Union. So, that is why whatever remnants were left of the Democratic Republican Party, so they were again eliminated, and this guy came with the Democratic Party, which later whose ideology later developed. This is what I'm talking about. You can see white supremacy against minorities, power, westward expansion, elimination or of native tribes and Indians. So today, Democratic Party, the Blues, the Kamala Harris, they are recognized with liberalism, the People's Party. So this is what the difference primarily. Similarly, when it comes to James Polk, so he became the president in 1845. He also was a Democrat. So what he did was, there is an interesting concept, manifest destiny. So he said, this James Polk, he said that, boss, it is the destiny of the whites, the American whites, to expand westwards and colonize the whole continent of North America in layman terms. Okay, fine. So just to clarify some more things, so this is the map till the 1820s. So you can see that this Louisiana territory, which was purchased, some part of it, this was from obtained from the Britishers in 1783. These were the colonies, 13 colonies. This portion is the Louisiana territory purchased from the French in 1803. So this was also occupied. Then we know that this Texas, Republic of Texas, and this Oregon, and this region of Mexico, this was later in the 1840s they were. So this was the, and then we come to 1850s. So in 1850s, more territories were annexed, they were acquired, and this was the structure. Still, we know that all the territories were not converted to states till now. Okay, fine. Now comes very famous figure. So one more important point is that, so this Democrats, they were influential from the 1826 to 1856, the Democrats. Okay. Other party, the other party which was powerful at that time was the Whig party, Whig, WHIGS. So they had their influence in 1830s to 1850s. The main, again, contrary, how they differed from the Democratic Party of Andrew Jackson and James Polk was that they were against the manifest destiny. Okay, they were against the slave labor. Okay, they were against the centralization of power in the government. So these were the differences. Okay, but Democrats had a huge sway until 1826 to 1856. Almost all the president belonged to the Democratic Party. Okay, now as the slavery was getting propagated, it was expanding. So some of the Whigs, there was some internal dissension or contrast between the Whigs itself. So some of the Whigs, they were not in support of slavery, while others were in support of slavery. So this gave rise to one of the most influential figures in US history, Mr. Abraham Lincoln. Okay, so Abraham Lincoln, he became the president in 1861. He formed the Republic Party. Okay, so Whigs are said to be sort of predecessors of the Republic Party, and they were champions of liberties, freedom, abolition of slavery. Okay, so now you can see Republicans of today, if we talk about Donald Trump's Republic Party, they are more conservationist. On the other hand, when this party was actually formed under the leadership of Abraham Lincoln, they were more liberal. They wanted to abolish slavery. So, are you getting how the ideologies have flipped? Okay. So, now the southern parties, the southern, which were predominantly slave states, they were not happy with Lincoln. Obviously, he wanted to abolish slavery. So it led to the start of the American Civil War, in which more than 700,000 people were killed. They lost their lives. So basically, two parts, two contrary or two rival militaries were formed. One was called the Union, and the other was called the Confederates. Okay. So Confederates basically included the southern territories, which were pro slavery, and the Union was this. So these, what was their aim was that they wanted to secede from the Union. They wanted to secede from the Union, which was already in the development. And that is again why I have been emphasizing that America is peculiar because of its status as a federation of states, so they had a right to secede. Now Abraham Lincoln and his union, they wanted them to be together. So there was a long war which spanned over 4 years, and ultimately this resulted in the victory of the Union over the Confederates. Okay, and it was over, actually, one additional fact that in 1854, as new territories were being incorporated in the Federation of United States of America. So earlier, this line, you remember, we had discussed this lower border of Missouri. This was the Missouri Compromise of Missouri. So when new states, this is the Louisiana Territory purchased in 1803. So when new territories were incorporated, so one of the legislators, he planned to pass a Kansas-Nebraska bill. This is present territory of Kansas. This is Oklahoma, and this is the Nebraska territory. Nebraska state of Nebraska of today's state is this. This is Nebraska. This is Kansas, and this is Oklahoma. Fine. So when the bill was passed, it was further added, fuel to the fire was added to form the Republican Party and fight against the Confederates. And after the Civil War, slavery was abolished. Now we come to a little bit further development of ideologies. So now Abraham Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln became the president. Now obviously slavery was abolished. So the Southern Democratic erstwhile slave states where Democratic Party was more in power, they were opposed to slavery. Sorry, Democratic powers, they became opposed to, started hating the Republicans. So the majority of the votes in the southern parts of USA, they started going to the Democrats. And the northern portion of the votes, whenever elections were conducted, they started going to the anti-slavery states of the Republican Party. And of course, since slavery was established, it was pro minorities, pro blacks, or pro colored people. So the Republicans started attracting the votes of the blacks or the colored people. So this was how the basic differentiation was made. But as the the Americans progressed, increasingly wealth started getting concentrated. Okay, wealth getting started concentrated not only among the Republicans but also among Democrats. Okay, both in South and North. In the meantime, during after the presidential election, after the Civil War took place, so till 1900, this concentration of wealth, the burgeoning of corporates, the inequality rose, and there were internal dissensions started taking place between the Republicans. So there was another group, a group of activists rose in opposition to both the parties to promote equality, the just and equitable distribution of resources. So while the Republican took their time, they were not as quick to impose or change about their ways. The Democrats took that opportunity to bring about massive reforms. So, and two consequential, influential figures came into picture here. Woodrow Wilson in 1913, and this is Franklin D. Roosevelt. They both were the presidents belonging to the Democratic Party. Now, what he did was that already there was dissension, there was concentration of power, as we have discussed in the previous 5 minutes. So, this Woodrow Wilson, he brought about reform measures, equality measures, welfare measures. Okay. And we know that 1929, in 1929, the Great Economic Depression took place, which devastated the American economy. But this Franklin D. Roosevelt came up with innovative plans. He was able to grasp and pull out from this economic devastation. He came with this plan of New Deal. So these things, these reforms, it helped revive the fortunes of Democrats in some ways. So, but now what next happens? Now Democrats were spreading reforms, but now reforms were spread that anti-racism, the libertarianism, welfare, the southern states, which were the erstwhile slave states, They did not agree with this, the ways of presidents like Woodrow Wilson and Franklin D. Roosevelt. They still believed in the concept of white supremacy, and many of the Democratic supporters, they went towards the went on to support the Republican Party. Okay, so it was the Republican Party who were earlier at odds with the Democrats of the southern states because they were responsible for the abolition of slavery under Abraham Lincoln. But now they did not agree with this anti-racism, this decentralization. Again, important was this Democrats after and during the period of Roosevelt and Wilson, this decentralization, this concentration of power, expansion of the government, that the government started taking more influence, making more influence among the parties of the states. So again, emphasis on the federation of states. The states which did not like their power to be diminished or taken away, they started opposing them. So this anti-racism and this government expansion of the government in the southern states by the Democrats, that was not accepted by many of the people who belong to the Democratic Party, and they switched to the Republican Party. And because of this reason, there was a time period where, apart from a few areas in the United States, the entire United States, it came under the influence of the Republican Party. The Democrats were nowhere to be seen. Okay, but the fortunes of the Democrats were revived because in the 20th century, in the late 1960s, 50s, 70s, so there was massive immigration, especially of the Hispanics. Again, I'm using a common term. Hispanics are mostly, they are defined, they define those people whose primary language is, native language is Spanish. Otherwise, in the last lecture, I also used it as a synonym, as synonymous with Latins, Latinos. Okay, but Latin is an umbrella term. It includes languages other than Spanish. So it includes other people whose native or mother tongue is not Spanish. Okay, we'll not go into that. So this immigration, this led to the revival of the fortunes of the Democratic Party. Why? Because unlike the Democratic Party of Andrew Jackson and Polk in the 1820s till 1850s until the Civil War, now this Democratic Party, post the presidential terms of Woodrow Wilson and Franklin D. Roosevelt, this Democratic Party was more oriented towards welfare of minorities. So the votes of minorities, the votes of blacks or the colored people, they started going now to the Democrats. Initially, during the Civil War, and after that, they went to the Republicans. So now they started going to the Democrats. So you see how the shapes. And in 1964, the Civil Rights Act was also passed. And so this is how it the main evolution period of the ideologies took place, and it still resonates with us. So now it is resonating with the parties of today, that is the Democrats. They are more liberal, they support immigration, welfare of minorities. On the other hand, the Republicans, which earlier used to be champions of the minorities, of the blacks, they were anti slavery, now they are being recognized with conservatism today, right? So Democrats went to such a drastic change, that from the white supremacist presidency of Andrew Jackson and James Polk, they elected the first black president, Barack Obama, in 2008. So massive drastic change in the ideology of the Democrats and the Republicans. Fine. Now, the interesting part about the adoption of colors. Why Republicans today are identified with color red while Democrats are identified with the color blue. Okay. So now again, this media channels, they don't let go, they're everywhere. So of course, red and blue colors were of insignificance because the popularity of the television started in America from 1976 onwards. Before that, there were black and white television, so how to distinguish between reds and blues? Okay. Then there were some news channels, some media channels primarily who were popular at that time. One was CBS, one was NBC, one was ABC. So they did not have any particular color scheme up till 1970s. Okay. But since the advent and popularity of the color television began, so CBS, in order to attract viewership to its channel, started innovating and decided to engage with a color scheme, red and blue, to become popular. And the reasons which they gave behind the adoption of red and blue, initially, they based it on the color of the uniforms during the Civil War and the leftist party. So you know that after the World War, there was this period of Cold War, basically the capitalist versus the communist. Okay. So communists or leftists are normally identified with the red color. Okay. And the Confederates, the this during the Civil War, the Party, the Union Party came to be recognized with they had the blue color, the Union Party, and the red color belonged to the leftist. Okay, so initially, what happened was that the Union Party came to be recognized, the blue color came to be recognized with the Republicans because the main figure Abraham Lincoln, he belonged to the Union. Okay, and leftists, they came to be recognized with the Democrats. Okay, what about NBC? NBC was more influenced by the political spectrum or landscape of the British. There, the conservatives, okay, there they were influenced by the conservatives and the Labour Party. So they also recognized with this color scheme similar to the CBS. Only ABC used a different color scheme. Why? Now comes this. This president is Ronald Reagan, who was elected in 1981. So we had studied in the previous lecture that the elections happened during previous year. So during the election campaigning and all 1980s, when the political analysts were doing their job, so in order to make things easier, they formed this ABC channel formed a color scheme based on the mnemonic. So they said, okay, this Ronald Reagan R, so he should stand with the Republicans, the Republican Party R, and they gave him the red color. So red Republican Ronald Reagan. So they gave red to the Republican and blue to the Democrats. So as they went on and on, initially, so subsequently, what happened was that down the line, down several years, this ABC, this CBS and ABC color scheme, they converged. And finally, in order to avoid confusion amongst the voters who were supporting parties or looking at political analysis on the news channel, this NBC also stuck with this scheme. So ultimately, the Republicans started getting identified with red, and the Democrats, they started getting identified with the blue of today's, which resonates with the today's color scheme. Fine. But it was still not etched until the 2000 elections between George W. Bush and A.L. Gore. When A.L. Gore repeated references to the red states which were which were being won by the Republican George Bush, and the blue states, they were being identified with A.L. Gore of the Democratic Party. So in 2000, this was firmly determined that the Republican will be identified with the red color, and the Democrats will be identified with the blue color. And finally, it resonates with the Democrats. And finally, we have what the color system it is today. So ultimately, whatever the color scheme is, whether the parties still adhere to their common ideologies or they flip their ideology like they have over the past 2 centuries, so that depends on the parties themselves. But on the whole, what is expected of the whatever whoever becomes the president, that they work for the welfare of the American citizens. Okay. So I hope today's session was interesting. So till we meet again next time, Jai Hind.